Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, everybody, for joining us back on our series of town halls. On behalf of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, I'd like to welcome you. Today's topic is student encampments and international student pitfalls. And we have two really amazing guests that are joining us today. It is my honor to introduce Kathryn, Brady, Kate, has practiced as an immigration and national law attorney since 2006, with extensive experience in family-based and employment-based petitions before the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the Department of State. And these days, Kate serves as the Immigration Department head. And we also have Franchel, who began her legal career in civil litigation, focusing on product liability defense in state and federal courts. And today she serves as the Immigration Senior Staff Attorney. Kate and Franchel, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Okay, well, welcome to our town hall today, and we've got a lot to cover, and we are going to broaden our topic a little bit because we know there are a lot of people participating in these free speech movements and social media and campus protest who are non-students. And so we will talk a little bit about students, but we're going to give you a little more insight into kind of generally how this is treated by our U.S. immigration agencies. Okay, so next. So I'm not going to read every bullet point here. This is something you can go back and look at later. But really, every single person in the United States, whether you are a citizen, a permanent resident, a visitor, a student, have no status in the U.S., have some basic rights. Those rights that are outlined in the Constitution, as you see here. One of those being what is intersecting right now on campus protests, and that is freedom of speech, along with that freedom of peaceful assembly. All right, we can kind of read those other ones. So next. I'm gonna give this one off to Frankie.
Okay, so what we see a lot of times is how the U.S. immigration agencies sort of treat the different types of speech and things that you may post online. And what we see is while it may be protected in that it's legal speech and you'll have some protections, if it's an unpopular political opinion, they may still see it as a threat. And by they, I mean U.S. agencies. And so this intersection that we have between U.S. immigration agencies trying to protect national security, as well as vetting immigrants for coming into the country, they're checking that. What that means a lot of times is extra scrutiny, especially for the Muslim community, but for a lot of people where there isn't really a reason for it. And they're really looking at that, and that really is impacting the free exercise of religion and speech and assembly and all those things. So that's where we're seeing this sort of play out in the immigration context. Next slide, please.
So these are,
back one, please.
These are some of the ways that we here have seen over and over again with either cases we've represented or cases that we have given other legal advice to, that they are really discriminated by these U.S. immigration agencies. Many of you who are here and trying to get immigration status will have experienced this either through U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services or through the Department of State, where waiting times are outrageous. There's always security clearance that don't seem to have any basis. If you're trying to get a visa abroad, there's this black hole we call the Department of State calls administrative processing, and sometimes you never get a decision. You don't get your interview, even though people who've had shorter times than you get an interview. Your interviews are canceled. Sometimes in their decisions, they take what you've said and turn it around and try and make it false statements for things that really are potentially just communication barriers with words that people said one thing, but it was taken as another by the immigration agency, and then turned around to say that he was either material misrepresentation, which is a term of art, or even that they have committed fraud. And obviously excessive delays at all stages of the process. And these may not seem like it, but these really are ways that agencies discriminate. We do have some programs that we'll talk about a little bit later that kind of wrap this all up for our immigration agencies. Next.
So while we can say you have these certain protections, the First Amendment doesn't apply in all areas. So it doesn't apply to private universities. And so the different policies and their handbooks and things like that they have, they're going to address how that plays out on their campuses. The Supreme Court has repeatedly allowed for public schools to like set reasonable time, place, manner restrictions when you're having gatherings, having protests. And that will continue to be at play. And so when you're exercising that right to free speech and you're demonstrating, protesting, you still have to keep in mind that while that is a right that you have, there are restrictions that are legally applied to those protests and gatherings. Next slide. Sorry.
So really, the main issue that we're looking at right now for where we believe that free speech is being infringed for immigrants and international students and scholars is these college protests. But we really want to emphasize that you can exercise your free speech rights within the bounds of the rules that are in place. Those rules should be openly available. They should be published. You should be able to find them easily within the information that the universities provide to students. And also, if you're an international student, that I have seen as I have researched this, that international students have some very good information about how you can protect yourself in your ability to still use your right to free speech, but not necessarily jeopardize your student status. And you would be surprised also at how many resources are out there from dozens, if not hundreds, of organizations about knowing your rights. Now, that's sometimes in criminal situations, know your rights, you know how to interact with law enforcement. There's immigration, know your rights, how to interact when it's those enforcement agencies, and also just really how to behave within the setting of a protest. I know that our civil department has made some of those videos, and it's important to understand, especially as you navigate this system, maybe if you were raised in another place where the rules are different, to really understand how, maybe somebody tells you have a right to free speech, but there are limits, and you need to understand what each school, because every school has their own rules about free speech and what is possible.
It sort of goes back to the slide before when I was saying, you have that right, but there are these legal time, place. And what I mean when I say time, place, manner restrictions, like they can say, like, yes, you can hold a protest, but not during these hours. If there, for example, are the week of final exams and the exams are going on, they're going to say, no, you can't do it if it's going to be loud right outside these classrooms, right? They may give you a different time, place. They may say you can hold it in the court on the far side of campus, but not right in the middle of the yard where they're having some other thing going on. So that's what I mean when I say these time, place, manner restrictions. They may say no bullhorns. That's more in the line of manner, what they're meaning by that. Those are all things that they can legally place limitations on and restrictions on. And so you need, as Kate just said, you need to make sure that you're looking at it. Most of the time, if you're applying, it's like, hey, we want to hold a protest, we want to hold something, they're going to give you some of that information, and you need to make sure that you're reviewing it because you have these rights, but in some respects, you're more vulnerable as an international student to certain things, because as a citizen, you're not subject to the possibility of having that status revoked, right? Whereas as an international student, you are. And so you just want to make sure that you are protesting or exercising your rights within the appropriate boundaries to just protect yourself.
Next slide. So as we've kind of alluded to, there are some things that universities and colleges can do that can jeopardize your status as a consequence of participating in protests. So you need to be very aware of anything that could get you expelled or suspended, because as an international student, if you are in that status, you have a certain level of classes you need to maintain. And if you are unable to complete your courses because you're not in school and they won't let you on campus, or you're suspended, they have every right to inform the government of that, and also have other consequences that maybe you will not be able to enroll again for the next semester. You may not be able to enroll in any university if there's problems with your international student status. And it's very, very important that you understand that if you are convicted of a crime, any crime, whether that is trespassing, whether that is unlawful assembly, any of those things, that can make it difficult for you in the future, either with a student visa or an immigration benefit in the future. ICE can be involved. If you have no status in the United States, because I know some students are here and able to attend university without having lawful status, that can be a huge problem if you encounter ICE. And some crimes may result in that U.S. consulate abroad, that's a Department of State entity, can cancel your visa. Now, to be clear, this is a distinction that I have had to make a lot with all my clients over the years, is there's a difference between your status in the United States that you have because you were an international student when you entered the country. You were given that inspection. They said you could stay as long as you were a student. We call that duration of status. If you've ever seen it written on anything, it's a D/S. And then your visa is a travel document. I heard a consular officer once say it's a ticket to knock at the door. So if you're inside the United States and the consulate abroad cancels your visa, that does not mean that you've been deported. That means the next time you want to leave the country and come back, you need to go get another visa. And that may be difficult. Okay, next slide.
I'll let you continue because I think this kind of follows with what you're saying.
Yeah. So these are really things that we tell people a lot. And this is pre these campus protests and everything. Consulting with or hiring a licensed immigration attorney when applying for your benefits can save you a lot of headaches. So if you don't understand when you're making an application what you're answering on those questions, and you answer no when you should be answering yes, or you don't give an explanation, or you don't give the right documents, that could either, like we said earlier, get you into a point where they're saying you're committing fraud, or just take longer. So those are some things that you can do to prevent it yourself. There are a lot of people out there who are not licensed who say that they can do immigration. There are accredited representatives. There are people who are just representing themselves as attorneys who have no law license, and that is a problem. So this next one is one that I cannot emphasize enough. You should always provide truthful answers to everything on an application, but especially about your arrests, what you've been charged with as a crime, any convictions, any time you spent in jail or prison or anything, incarceration, and any group affiliations. I could dive into this a lot, but really a lot of people don't understand what it means to be arrested. They don't understand whether or not they've been charged or if they've been convicted. Those are all things an attorney can explain to you. And sometimes you might want to talk to a criminal attorney if it's an arrest and all of that.
Before you move to the next one, Kate, I was just saying
group affiliations too. Group affiliations are one that get a lot of our clients in trouble, because there are attorneys out there who have given advice that unless you pay a membership fee or have done something official, that you are not affiliated with a group. But I use that affiliation. It's a very broad term because on the applications, it's a much more narrow terms. They actually about 5 or 6 words, and they say, and it's really anything you've ever done: volunteering, attending meetings, attending conferences, any of those kind of things. And it's very, very specific. It does not matter if you have never paid a membership. You could be affiliated with that group. And if you do not put it on an application, the government assumes that you're trying to hide it for a reason if it's a group that's unfavorable to them. Do you want to add something, Frankie?
Yes, I was just going to say, sort of in line with that, and how the words can be very nuanced and precise, because I noticed, like, we don't have listed here detained. And so that's one of the big ones, where technically you weren't arrested, right? And you weren't charged, but they detained you for a certain amount of time. Maybe they said, hey, I need all of you that were standing in this area to come over here. And they keep you over there and they're talking to you guys for an hour. Did they take you to an actual jail or to a police office? No. But if they kept you there and they were saying, no, you can't leave yet, that's a detainment. And so there are immigration applications that specifically ask, have you ever been arrested, cited, detained, right? And so if you say no, and then this picture comes up where you were at the protest and you're in the group that was being detained, right now, as Kate has said, they'll use that as an opportunity to say, oh, you're committing fraud, you're withholding information, why are you doing that? And so it's the simple things where you are seemingly staying within the bounds that can get you into difficulty when it comes to immigration pieces. So I just wanted to mention that, because those specific words, cited, detained, arrested, have gotten several of our clients into issues where we've had to unwind that.
Yeah, and being stopped when you enter and exit the country and talked to by the officials at the airport, or, interviews with the FBI, those are all encompassed in that.
Exactly. And that sort of ties into, I'll take the next one and you can piggyback, but it ties into that next piece that you should anticipate. You should expect that when you post something, if you're in the middle of an immigration application, or if you're trying to get that benefit, you should expect and anticipate that is going to be reviewed. Somebody is looking, they're checking the gram, they're checking Twitter, they're checking X, they're looking at all of that, and they're going to want to see what did they post on Insta last week? Because I need to know if they were saying something that they want to say is an issue. Is this against our national security? And so you just need to be mindful of, and you have that right. You absolutely have the right to post. It's not to say that you can't, but again, as that international student, as that person who is seeking an immigration benefit, you are more vulnerable. You have the onus of proving that you're eligible for the benefit, right? So when it comes up later, you're going to have to explain what you meant by whatever it is that you posted or said and is now on video. So I think that's just really important to expect it. Don't assume, like, well, as the commercials say, nobody's going to know. They're never going to know. Assume that they're going to know and that somebody is going to review it. That should be your mindset with all of your actions and your speech.
Yes, the Department of Homeland Security has started using artificial intelligence a lot, and I think this is one of the ways that they can cull through a lot of information. And what we believe is maybe harmless speech and protected speech does not always mean that they don't see it as a negative factor in an immigration benefit, because they have a much lower level of what they can say is a problem. Like, you're not maybe going to get charged with a crime, but that also may lead to you not getting a future immigration benefit. So the next one is really just, I think probably the criminal section here, the criminal defense has said this probably in some other videos, but you do have a right to an attorney if you're ever approached by law enforcement or government agents, even if they're just saying, hey, let's go have a cup of coffee, we'll help you with your immigration case or your wife's immigration case or whatever. You always have the right to an attorney, and it is our belief that you are always better off asserting that right than talking to them by yourself. I watched a legal seminar once, and it was by a criminal defense attorney, and it was on the criminal side, and he said, if you ever have the unfortunate event where you're approached by law enforcement, your Fifth Amendment right to stay silent is your friend. Your right to an attorney is your friend. And do not try and think you can talk your way out of something, because even if you were telling all the truth, that does not mean that our government and law enforcement are not able to take your words and manipulate how that affects you in the future. So the other thing that our civil department talks about a lot is a lot of what they do is travel difficulties on the watch list and things like that. So if you are deciding to exercise your right to free speech and freedom of assembly, like we said, you are probably somebody that the government is aware of. So do not be surprised when you experience travel difficulties, whether that's delays for additional questioning or maybe extensive searches even to that point, or not being able to board a plane, getting the what we call the quad S or the 4 S's on your boarding pass, or not being able to print your boarding pass. So all of these things are things that we deal with. And so we're just giving you a heads up that we know how the government will view what you're saying and how it can play out in real life. Okay, next slide. Oh, I forgot I made this one so small for my tiny little old eyes. These are some big topics. So Frankie and I will try and hit a couple of them before we have some questions. These are ones that I thought, I always try to anticipate what people are going to want to know. So I'm going to take the first one, which is if I am at a protest, can ICE come up and just deport me from the country? And the answer there is no, in most cases, unless you already have an order of removal that you have been evading, and they're able to just what we call execute that order, meaning they don't have to do anything else. They're already able to just say you're already out the door. But there is a process if you are a non-citizen and they are trying to have you leave the country, and we call those removal proceedings. Most people refer to them as deportation proceedings. And even if you're placed in deportation proceedings, just like in criminal proceedings, you are able to defend yourself in that. It doesn't mean just because you're in front of an immigration judge, it's, the next door is out the country. So I would definitely recommend, if that ever is something that you have to experience, that is 1,000%, you should get an attorney for those. A local attorney to where you are going through that process is the best. Do you want to take the next one?
Sure. So the next one, of course, it's with the Department of State stuff. So it's a lot of the visas and whatnot. And I think the thing to remember there is that visas are privileges, to put it in. It's like a privilege. It's not a right that you're guaranteed as someone coming to the country. And so they have more discretion there. And therefore, they are able to, cancel visas based on arrests and convictions and things like that. And even for things that we may think, oh, that didn't seem like a big deal, my neighbor down the street did the same thing, right? Like it can impact you differently when you're here on a visa, and they can be canceled for seemingly minor infractions, right? So that's something to keep in mind. As far as administrative processing without an explanation, unfortunately, it happens way too often, right? Like your case enters, as Kate has called it before, this black hole of we're waiting for something, or they're still processing it. Now, a lot of times they will give you a notice and say, hey, you're getting additional administrative processing, but it doesn't tell you why, and it doesn't tell you how long that will take. And that's the biggie, is that you're just waiting, and there's not necessarily a good mechanism to say, hey, I've been waiting for this long, move me along. You just kind of get stuck. And so it's best if we can avoid getting into that processing from the beginning, and just try to avoid doing things that catch their eye and place you under that extra scrutiny. Can't always be done, because as we said, sometimes the things that land you there shouldn't. And that's the biggie, is that it's not that you're necessarily doing something wrong that catches their eye. And then I'm not exactly sure. I'll let Kate handle as far as the supplemental questions, because I know that's just additional questions, but I'll let her speak.
So there's a form that the Department of State uses in visa applications. And if you've ever applied for a visa and they've asked you for this, it really asks for like all your addresses and family members and any of your social media handles. And really, they are going to deep dive you on that one. As Frankie said, some of these things you can avoid, but unfortunately, some of them are seriously discriminatory, because we know it's because of the country you're from. And especially for males, this seems to be a hole they fall into, just they get a little bit pushed into that hole by our U.S. government just because of the way that they look at things. Because even though we understand that where you're from and the political beliefs that you have and the religion that you practice should not lead you to be classified as somebody who is a national security threat. There are vocal politicians, there are vocal other nonprofits out there, and many agencies within our government who do believe that all of those things are reasons for you to be a threat to us. And I don't think I'm giving you any information that anybody would be at all shocked about. So then the U.S. Custom and Border Protection. So that's as you come into the country from travel abroad. Typically, sometimes like I live in Texas, so they do have some border enforcement that's a little bit north of our southern border up to like maybe 100 miles north of the border. And so they do encounter people. But at the border or even at an airport, which is what we call a port of entry, they can refuse you admission. They can say you don't meet the requirements of the visa category. Let's say you're coming in as a student and you're not allowed to work, and they're saying, hey, what did you do last summer? And you kind of give them what you think is a very typical explanation, and they hear it, and you're saying, yeah, I stayed with this family, and I kind of sometimes I nanny for their kids or babysit for their kids, and they'll say, aha, you weren't allowed to work. That was work, and turn you right around. The one that we've seen a lot with international students is Iranians who are either not even given the visas at the Department of State or refused entry. One of the worst ports of entry is at Logan Airport in Boston, which unfortunately has a lot of schools there. So there's a lot of attorneys who are fighting that through some national organizations to try and get that unwound. And of course, the U.S. and Iran are not on good terms, and we've decided to kind of see a national security threat of any student who's coming to study, especially scholars who are doing a lot of good international studies to improve lots of different areas, medicine and engineering and science and a lot of that. And unfortunately, that happens for us. So the other one that's here is expedited removal and a 5-year ban for a lack of a visa or fraud or misrepresentation. So this is kind of one of those places where you can get tripped up on things that you said before, whether it was on a visa application or in an immigration interview. That's the fraud or misrepresentation. Lack of a visa is a little bit different. Those are people who really maybe are trying to come in with a visa that's not even theirs or something like that. But it's very serious because they are turning you right around and putting you back on the next plane back to where you came from and telling you cannot come back into the United States for 5 years. And it's extremely hard after that to get a visa. It was already hard for the people who we're talking about here. And this just kind of raises that to even another level.
And so the next one that has USCIS, the first one that's listed there, the Controlled Application Review and Resolution Program, which we call CARP, it's sort of akin to the administrative processing for visas, right? It's the black hole for immigration applications, non-visas, but it's that same additional scrutiny, additional processing. We need extra information. We're going to do a deeper dive on your application and information you've given us. And once you've been placed within CARP, your application tends to get delayed and take forever. And you can repeatedly ask, hey, what is the status? What's going on? And you just get like form responses of it's in the process. It's in the process. One good thing with CARP, unlike some of the visas, is you can oftentimes, if it goes long enough, seek a mandamus to at least get a decision and say, hey, tell us what's going on here. You can use the APA, the Administrative Processing Act, to sort of get some answers. But I can tell you, and Kate obviously would agree, that our government, our courts are going to say, it's got to be a pretty long delay. We're not talking, you've been waiting for a year oftentimes. That's typically not going to be long enough. And so CARP it's real, it's there, and it's a headache that we see far too often on several of our cases. The next one, asylum processing. And I think this is just where priorities, the priority times that come through with those, they're just not being met. We have a lot of backlog on asylum cases, and at one point they were doing the first in, first out. So it's like if your application had already been pending, you were just sort of stuck because the number of asylum cases that come through, you're just getting pushed further and further back. And so
last in, first out actually was what they changed.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. I said that backwards, but yes, the last one to come through was the first one that they were processing. And so if you had been pending, you just sat, because every time someone new came in, they were in front of you in line as opposed to behind you in line. Thank you for correcting my misspeak. And then the deferred enforcement departure. I'm gonna let you have that one for the most part.
This is something that's been around for a while for other countries, but it has recently been offered for Palestinians. And really, it's an opportunity to get a work permit. And this is a good thing. This is one of the good things that's on this slide, probably the only good thing on this slide. And it's really an opportunity for people to maybe get a little bit of relief while they're here in the United States, because it's not quite temporary protected status, but it does allow some benefits, and it's pretty new, so we don't have a lot to share with that. And the only thing I will say kind of overall, and I think we're almost to our question slide, is the current situation that's going on is a lot of protests that have to do with the atrocities in Gaza and divesting from Israel, and really just standing up for the rights of Palestinians. But this has been going on a really long time, and so I want you to know that we understand that this is hot right now about Palestine, but we've seen it over and over again with Syria, with Afghanistan, with Pakistan, with Yemen, so a lot of North African countries. So just be aware that this is kind of a global issue for people who come from Muslim majority countries. So we're kind of talking about all of you. Not just people who supported Palestine now or before. All right, next one. I thought we were at the question slide. We'll see what's come up. Okay.
All right, Kate and Franchel, that was amazing. It was a lot of information and some really great tips. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing that with us. We have a few questions here, if you don't mind. Question here is, would one's immigration process be affected if they donated to causes that were for Palestine, even though they made sure that the nonprofit organizations were based out of the U.S.?
You know what? I think this is one of the frustrating things that we see. And in the history of MLFA, we have many, many cases that have been in this situation. I think some of the bigger cases that have gone on in the last 15 years have been for people who have made charitable donations to U.S. Humanitarian aid that are for Palestine, and that has gotten people into situations where the government has accused them of supporting or material support of terrorism. So this is, I'm sorry, it's going to be an attorney answer of it depends. And I would say that there's no safe haven right now. The U.S. government has not provided any safe haven. They're also trying to attack nonprofits for some of the legislation that's out there. So unfortunately, I can't give you it's going to be okay. So sorry. I'm just truthful at this point.
No, thank you. And this is good guidance that especially those of us that are here on student visas, as you mentioned, that it's a privilege, and that's something that we need to really understand the framework around it by understanding the rules of the university, and to be able to navigate through those. Speaking of rules and navigating, if one is an international student and they're peacefully participating in a protest, however, nearby there's others that step out of bounds, can that international student be held liable, or can they be processed for that? And what advice do you have in that situation?
There's a lot that can go on there, right? So you can have like university consequences, you can have criminal consequences, you can have immigration consequences. So I would say that in a lot of ways, those are the layers of your issues. And unlike most criminal situations where, if Frankie and I roll up to 7-Eleven and she's the driver and I go in and rob it, she's just as liable as I am. Here, I think that there is some ability to distance yourselves as long as you are not, you don't have to be the one initiating it to be in the fray and to be arrested and all of that. So if you feel like you have been wrongfully arrested, definitely get a criminal attorney and fight that. If you feel like you've been wrongfully suspended or expelled from school, there are ways to also, fight that through the school administration. But yeah, if things happen, they happen fast. I've seen some of these protests where, what was it, Dartmouth maybe came in like 2 hours after the encampment was set up. So you just really need to be aware that there are agitators out there on both sides sometimes. And yeah, you could be swept up, and it happens in a lot of ways, not just in these campus protests. In life that can happen. So maybe this is just a little pro tip. Just be careful who your friends are.
And that's what I was going to say. I think the thing to remember on both of those questions really is, can it affect you? Yes. Most likely, yes, right? Will it necessarily be the end and it means a negative final decision? No, but will it likely delay or prolong your process? That is in all likelihood a yes, right? Like if you were involved with the protests, although you were peaceful, again, with the immigration benefits, you have the burden of proving that you're eligible for the benefit, right? So if they're saying, look, you were at this protest, it got out of hand, I'm not sure who all was there, but you were part of it. Were you supporting that? That's going to be the question. And you have to prove, well, yes, I was there, but I wasn't the issue, right? Like you're left with that responsibility. And so the question of, will it affect you? Possibly, yes. Does it necessarily mean that your application is going to be denied? No, but it's going to add to the work that you'll have to do to get to the ultimate approval.
Yeah, just think of some of the harsh things that some people have said, either in or around the protests. And the government likes to paint this broad brush, like, well, if you were there, you must agree with it.
Exactly.
So that can be held against you. And I think it's just a good life lesson to learn. How many of us had like co-signed for a car and somebody didn't pay it and then your credit was hurt, or, those kind of things. So sometimes the choices of others do affect your life, and you just need to be aware of those, make good choices for you, what your risk tolerance is. And you absolutely have rights to free speech, but don't be surprised if there are other consequences that don't seem fair and that you have to fight through to come out on the other side.
And so just like our parents always advise us, make your friends wisely.
Yeah.
And so that kind of connects us to the last question is, have you seen examples or scenarios where international students that have been participating peacefully have had implications or delays as part of their immigration or student status?
So of course we're pretty early on. I haven't had anyone come to us yet, but I have seen some things in the online chat forums for immigration attorneys. One of them said that I believe it was a student who's from somewhere in South America attended the protest and got arrested. And that meant that the U.S. consulate, and I want to say it's Colombia, but I don't even remember, got notified and their visa was revoked. But they're in the U.S., so they're not, like I said, they're not deported, but that is a consequence. And there's just a lot of things that you need to be aware of. If you're a DACA student, you cannot get more than 2 misdemeanors or you will lose your ability to have your status. And these come fast, right? It's not leaving a place is trespassing. And I don't know what other, there's like lots of charges that have come around. So you get 2 of those and you plead guilty to those, you may not have DACA anymore. So I haven't seen them yet. Again, we are only a couple of weeks into this whole scenario, but I can foresee a lot of things.
Well, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Franchel. Really appreciate your time in joining us today and sharing this wealth of knowledge and information. I believe these slides will be put together as part of a kit that will be sent out. So I want to thank you again. And for all of our guests that are attending today and that will be viewing online, a huge thank you for tuning in and to give us the opportunity to share some of this advice and some of these tips. The Muslim Legal Fund of America is a nonprofit full-service defense fund dedicated to defending Muslim civil rights and liberties at a federal level. And we are here and we're able to do all of this work because of support from amazing and generous individuals like yourselves. So please be sure to continue to donate and continue to support the work that we do. And this is part of a town hall series. And as you see on the next slide, we have more town halls coming up. So please spread the word and please come back and join us again. The topic for tomorrow will be Signs of the Times, Lessons from College Admin Responses to Campus Protests. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again.